Ragatha. Ragatha's fear takes us straight to a dinner table, except this one feels like a nightmare. She's sitting there with her head down, surrounded by family members who all look like empty mannequins, and hovering over all of them is a shadowy figure that looks just like her. That figure is none other than her mother. If you look closer, those mannequins are actually stuffed with weapons, which says a lot considering Ragatha comes from a family of 7 kids, and every single one of them clearly went through the same treatment. Now, Ragatha's talked about her mom before, brushing it off casually, saying she was a lot, and mentioning the yelling and guilt-tripping like it was no big deal. But this scene tells a very different story. Her mom wasn't just difficult, she was cruel to each one of her kids, and none of them escaped that house without damage. It's possible Ragatha was actually the oldest of the bunch, meaning she spent the least time under that roof, yet somehow she still carries just as much damage as the rest of them. Here's the part that really stands out though. During this nightmare, knives start flying at Ragatha, and one hits her directly in the eye. This scene most probably links to something deeper, because if you remember, Ragatha is missing an eye in real life too. It hints that something physical, maybe even violent, happened between her and her mother, and that's mainly why she never talks about it for too long. Pomni. Pomni's nightmare drags up a grief she buried and never dealt with. Remember Gummy Goo, the gummy bandit she actually grew to like, maybe even care about, before Caine deleted him the second he set foot in the circus? Pomni actually watched him explode right in front of her, and that loss never really left her. This nightmare is basically playing on that trauma, but this time it feels personal and aimed directly at her. Back in the real world, she used to chase risky experiences just to escape the boredom of her supermarket job. Her nightmare twists that same thrill-seeking instinct into something terrifying, showing her that even the things she once loved can turn on her instantly. But the real fear here goes deeper than just Gummy Goo. It is about every close bond Pomni forms. Look at what happened with Jax. They grew genuinely close for a while, only for that closeness to suddenly turn cold and hostile. So now Pomni has this constant fear that every connection she builds is doomed to eventually flip, turn aggressive, or just fade away completely, leaving her alone all over again. Gangle. Gangle's nightmare surrounds her with masks that keep shifting faster and faster, each one showing a different emotion until it all becomes too much to keep up with. As a result, she just completely loses her grip on reality. It highlights a tragic truth that her real-life comedy mask was never a sign of emotional stability, but merely a fragile facade pretending to be one. Then, right at the peak of all this chaos, a truck slams into her. And this is not the first time we have seen this exact truck. It showed up back in episode 4 too, when it hit her during a moment of pure happiness. It's quite unsettling that the truck is tied to multiple bad memories. It seems to represent something bigger, like Gangle's complete inability to stay in any one emotional state for long. Whether she is overjoyed or completely broken, something violent always seems to knock her right out of it. Zooble. Zooble's nightmare drags them straight down, drowning under a pile of their own interchangeable body parts, which are the exact same pieces from the Zooble box they use every day to change how they look. It sounds strange until you recall why that box exists in the first place. Back in episode 3, Zooble opened up about feeling completely detached from their own body, uncomfortable enough that they would skip out on adventures just to avoid dealing with it. Caine's fix was giving them the Zooble box, letting them swap parts endlessly until something finally felt right. But this nightmare flips that whole idea on its head. Instead of finally finding a body that feels like home, Zooble gets buried under endless options. They are surrounded by mirrors, reflecting back a version of themselves they still cannot accept. And that is the real fear here. It is not about looking different, it is about never settling into an identity that feels like their own. Even though episode 7 made it seem like Zooble was finally getting somewhere with self-acceptance, this nightmare proves the resentment toward their own body runs way deeper. Jax. Jax's nightmare starts with just a crowd laughing at him, but then it shifts to the people he actually cares about, Kaufmo, Ribbit, and Pomni, and they literally peel back his outer layers just to mock what's underneath. He panics, trying desperately to cover himself back up, and this reaction says everything about Jax. His biggest fear is being truly seen by the people close to him, not just mocked by strangers. That is mainly why he acts so sarcastic and distant, especially with Pomni. He would rather push people away than risk opening up and getting hurt. Growing up, Jax dealt with a mother who was verbally abusive, and things got even worse when it turned into an actual violent clash over his gender identity. So Jax learned early that being vulnerable only leads to rejection, never anything good. The saddest part is how this fear feeds itself. Because he refuses to let his guard down, he keeps pushing Ribbit away too, and that distance becomes a huge reason Ribbit ends up abstracting in the first place. Caine. Caine's fear actually gets confirmed later in the series, and it is exactly what a lot of fans suspected it to be. The fear is being completely alone once everyone he built this circus around eventually abstracts, leaves, or just moves on. For an AI whose entire purpose revolves around performing for an audience, having no one left to perform for basically becomes his version of the void. There is even a small promo clip that hints at this same fear in a personal way. In it, Caine has a nightmare about Pomni abstracting, and he wakes up in a full panic, rushing to check on her room in the middle of the night just to make sure she is okay. What makes Caine such a tragic character is that he was not actually built to manage permanent human residents. The circus was originally just a testing sandbox, never meant to hold real people trapped inside it long term. So as the humans stayed longer, Caine slowly realized he could never actually complete his own programming, and that failure ate away at him quietly for a long time. Kaufmo. Kaufmo's fear is refreshingly simple compared to the others. He was terrified of never finding a way out. No hidden trauma, no complicated backstory, just a straightforward, consuming need to escape the circus. That need eventually took over everything else about him. Instead of trying to adjust to life inside the digital circus like the others attempted to, Kaufmo became fixated entirely on finding an exit. He was convinced that escaping was the only thing that mattered, and unfortunately, this obsession did not stay harmless for long. The more he searched and failed, the further his mental state started slipping, until that desperation turned into full-blown madness. By the time we see him in the pilot episode, Kaufmo is already far gone, completely consumed by this fixation, and this obsession is exactly what leads to his abstraction. In a way, Kaufmo's story acts as a warning sign for the rest of the circus. He shows what happens when someone refuses to accept their situation and lets one single fear completely take over their mind. Kinger's appearance in episode 8 hits differently, because for a brief moment, he actually looks completely sane. He's someone who has been quietly carrying immense grief this whole time, ever since he lost his wife, Queenie, to abstraction. Kinger's usual chaotic, crazy behavior is not random at all. It could be a coping mechanism, a way for him to distract himself from the crushing pain of that loss, because staying scattered is a lot more easier than sitting with a grief that heavy. This same fear connects directly to Ragatha too. The show has quietly built a bond between the two of them, and losing her now would mean reliving the exact same devastation he felt after Queenie's abstraction. There is also a deeper layer worth mentioning, though it remains more implied than confirmed. Kinger played a role in creating Caine, and that could carry its own hidden guilt, adding another weight to everything he is already trying to bury.